Sebastian Wildfire stood on the same raised stone where, 4 winters earlier, a roomful of officials had made a spectacle of deciding what she was allowed to be. Ink stained the side of her thumb and the heel of her palm where she had steadied the charter copy too tightly. The parchment in her hands was thick enough to resist tremor, but not thick enough to hide it. Harrow sat at her boots, scar ridging his brindle muzzle from brow to cheek. One ear split at the tip, both ears angled forward at each scrape of chair leg in the chamber. He had learned the acoustics of threat better than any clerk of procedure. When voices shifted a half tone, his shoulders shifted with them. When a bench hinge squealed, his eyes cut to the source before hers did. The chamber smelled of lamp oil, old vellum, damp wool cloaks steaming as bodies warmed, and faint chalk dust from the law board near the right aisle. Cale Rook stood 3 paces to her left, hands clasped behind his back in the posture he had been taught as a boy, and then reinforced as a man. Hide anger, hide need, hide shame under one disciplined alignment of shoulders and spine. His jaw moved once, a tiny set and release. On the center wall behind them, Chancellor Varn's sigil had been pried away that morning, leaving a pale square in the stone like healed skin, where something embedded had finally been cut out. "Read the 9th," a delegate from the upper benches said, voice cracking on the first word and then hardening as if embarrassed by it. Sebastian lifted her chin and read anyway. "No person may be designated, claimed, traded, or assigned by lineage, debt, marriage, or decree. Status is self-declared. Labor is contracted by consent. All transit brands and hereditary marks issued under compulsion are void." A man near the rear coughed into his sleeve. Somebody whispered a prayer too quietly to parse. A clerk in ink-stiff cuffs pressed his lips together and stared up at the tally board as if willing brass to move by concentration alone. The tally board snapped once, then again, each brass pin flipping against iron. 41 to 17. The sound was not loud, but it moved through bone and stayed there. For a second, Sebastian couldn't tell if she was breathing. Harrow exhaled through his nose, leaned his weight into her calf, and settled with that deliberate heaviness he used when he was checking whether she would stay upright. She had not yet moved when memory hauled her backward to the first hall, first ritual, first moment she understood that leaving had run out and contesting had begun. In 1933, she had left Ash with a wrapped compass, a waxed map tube, and a transit band forged from flattened copper wire she had hammered at night in a shuttered shed behind a dye house. In 2194, she crossed brine by following abandoned dredger tracks after floodwater drowned the salt roads and turned patrol schedules irregular. In 2196, she slipped through Vale under a rain cloak that stank of peat smoke, one hand on Harrow's collar so he would not lunge at patrol horses that came too close with teeth bared and reins jerked cruelly. Territory by territory, a state had tried to press a hereditary labor mark onto her throat and wrists. Territory by territory, she became good at listening for boot cadence before dawn and leaving before doors started opening. A mapmaker learns to count distance by soles and weather, and by where pain sits at day's end. She knew the angle of mountain light before ice, the shape of shallow river bends where carts could ford, the color shift in marsh reeds that meant hidden sink. By her own marks, burned with charcoal into the inside of her tube cap, she had traveled 1,240 miles in 4 years and slept under more culverts than roofs. No official had asked where her talent came from. They asked how it could be used, and under whose ledger her labor could be filed. Ash had wanted her in furnace registries because her mother had worked ore books before a kiln burst and took half a street with it. Brine had marked her for hall crews by birth district alone, regardless of whether she could read tide tables better than their foreman. Vale held her in a receiving house 3 nights until she bit through a guard's glove and ran while the alarm bell still swung and men shouted contradictory directions in the rain. The forged transit brand sat now at the inside of her left forearm, a false burn scar carefully inked and ringed to mimic official loops and district notch. It had gotten her through gates where names were less important than marks. It had almost gotten her killed when a customs clerk in Vale pressed his thumbnail along the scar and smiled at the place where heat had never truly kissed skin. He had called another man over. She had laughed as if unconcerned, spilled her satchel on purpose, let maps and char sticks scatter, and used their annoyance to leave before the second inspection. She carried that near discovery into 2197 and into the Hall of Seals, where the renewal conclave gathered under bronze lamps and layered law over violence with polished ceremony. When she entered that day, boots still dusted from the south road, eyes in the chamber shifted with the same small collective motion as starlings changing direction. Her coat was patched at shoulder and cuff, the strap of her map tube cut diagonally across her chest. Harrow moved near her knee, silent, only his claws ticking on polished stone and then stopping whenever she stopped. At center dais stood Chancellor Ilex Varn in black ceremonial wool with silver thread at cuffs and collar seams. No crown. The office preferred austerity as theater. His voice carried without strain because everyone had learned that missing one of his words could cost work, rations, mobility, or standing. To order, he said, and struck the seal rod once. Parchments were unrolled. The opening procedure was recited by a clerk with sand-dry lips and a slight stammer that vanished whenever he spoke citations. Public repeal requires chamber vote, he read, by counted division, in witness of all seated delegations. Ilex nodded as if transparent process had been his benevolent invention. Then his gaze found Sebastian and held it long enough that the nearest benches went still. Step forward, unclassified. The word hit harder than insult because of where he put it. Not nameless, not accused, but stripped from category so he could assign one for her in front of every witness present. She climbed the 3 steps into the ritual ring, while murmurs moved along benches like wind through dry reeds. Ilex lifted a parchment stamped with conclave seal. In accordance with Designation Code, Title 6, Subclause 12, an unclassified adult may be claimed into lawful designation by regent authority when no valid hereditary chain is present. He turned his head to the right platform. Regent heir. Cale came forward in formal coat fastened to throat, expression cut to unreadable calm. She knew him first by decrees and by stories from road camps. He signed winter suspensions when riots threatened granaries, let harmful orders stand in seasons when enforcement could be done quietly, and corrected clerks for imprecision while ignoring what precision was used to enforce. People called him exact as if exactness erased impact. Ilex continued, each word clipped and clean. Code permits touch declaration at throat mark. Upon contact, assignment records as binding. The room leaned in as one body. Sebastian felt pulse in her gums and fingertips. Her right hand found Harrow's neck by instinct and met raised scar tissue under fur. Harrow's growl began low, almost below hearing, but deep enough that men in front rows glanced toward the dais edge and shifted boots back from where his teeth could reach if he sprang. Cale stopped at arm's reach. Not touching, not moving. The pause stretched past protocol. Lamps hissed softly. Someone dropped a stylus. It rang against stone and spun. Ilex's jaw tightened. Proceed. Cale did not. His hand lifted halfway, halted beside her throat close enough that she felt warmth from his palm. Cedar soap, trace metal oil from weapon fittings. He lowered his hand without contact. The room did not exhale. It fragmented into whispers, denials, whispered objections. One startled laugh, quickly smothered. A delegate from Brine half rose and sat again when his neighbor grabbed his sleeve. Sebastian did not realize she had bared her teeth until Harrow pressed harder against her shin, and she unclenched enough to taste blood where she had bitten inner cheek. Ilex struck Rod again, harder. Adjourned pending procedural review. Humiliation would have been simpler if coercion had completed itself and left clear injury. Being displayed and unresolved left her neither assigned nor free, only exposed in the center of a machine that punished uncertainty and then blamed uncertainty for disorder. People poured from chambered doors and knots, delegates arguing rule interpretations, scribes clutching roll cases, guards pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Sebastian took service corridor curving behind tribunal rooms, one hand hooked in Harrow's collar to keep him from nipping at hems and swinging robes. Her breath came short and sharp, as if she had run uphill with a load. At a blind turn, Kale stepped from an alcove. Not blocking. Just there, in her path line. She stopped fast enough her boots squeaked on damp stone. No witnesses within earshot. Drips from cracked pipe marked time into rusted bucket, each tap strangely loud. He looked first at her forearm where forged transit brand sat beneath sleeve cloth darkened by sweat. Then he looked up. You should file before he seals today's minutes. You paused me on a dais and call that help? I paused him. Don't make grammar into mercy. His mouth twitched, not humor. Tribunal filing window closes at bellfall, if you want hearing now. Sebastian stepped to pass. Kale's hand came up toward her wrist and stopped short before skin. Reflex, almost protective, and restraint landed harder than a grab would have. She watched his fingers hover over pulse point and did not step away. He lowered his hand. South clerk's door. Second latch sticks. Why tell me this? Because if I had touched your throat in there, assignment would already be logged, and no charter clause could unwind that cleanly. She swallowed once. You think I owe gratitude. I think you owe yourself speed. She walked, then turned back once at corridor bend. He stood where she left him, shoulders squared for an argument no one else could see. At South Clerk's door the second latch did stick. She kicked it with heel, shoved, and got inside before bell. She filed petition against coercive designation while wax dripped and clerk muttered about improper forms, then accepted them anyway when she cited the same code line he hoped she hadn't memorized. Tamsin Reed met her in archive underlight. Tamsin had ink under every fingernail and a permanent crease between brows from peering at brittle script. Clerk blue coat patched at elbows. Tiny knife in boot for opening wax packets and, if needed, other uses she did not discuss. You are late, she hissed before glancing down. Harrow, hello to you too. She held hand out. Harrow sniffed, sneezed on her cuff, accepted her. Sebastian shut archive door with her heel. I filed. Good. Bad. Both. Tamsin reached beneath desk and lifted wrapped bundle bound with sail twine. I stole these before morning inventory. If you're going to tell me that was reckless, wait until after I show you what's in them. She set 2 ledgers on table. Cracked leather covers, spine labels with only sequence marks and territory initials. No decorative script, no obvious incriminating title. Inside, columns of names, designation categories, transfer points, sums paid, auction sums. Sebastian leaned over, finger tracking line after line. She had heard rumors at cook fires and ditch camps, names swapped like contraband, but rumor had never carried serial numbers and witness seals and payment notations balancing to coin. Each entry carried wax stamp. Ash used red wax with mica flecks that flashed under low lamp. Brine stamp wax looked green-black, eel oil cut giving slight sheen and smell when warmed. Vale used clear beeswax with suspended gold dust catching light like trapped pollen. Her mapmaker's eye found what clerks missed. Transit notations in margins matching river toll points she had crossed, dates aligning with route closures and thaw schedules. People had been moved and sold according to road condition and storm forecasts, the same way freight was timed. This one, she said, tapping page with ink-dark nail. Transferred through East Salt Gate on flood week. Impossible for wagon convoy unless escorted on dredger track. I was on that track in 2194. Road markers were under 3 spans of water. Tamsin nodded, sharp and quick. I can authenticate sequence and custody gaps. I can't authenticate route feasibility. You can. I can verify seal wax too. Sebastian pressed thumbnail into a cooling test blob near lamp. Brine mix goes grainy if cut wrong. This texture matches official batch. These are real. Footsteps sounded overhead. Both women froze. Harrow lifted head, ears pricked, breath held. Steps passed. Harrow lowered chin again but stayed alert. Tamsin rewrapped books. I copied key pages. Originals must disappear before Chancellor's auditors sweep. Where? Already moved. Don't ask. If they search you, you won't have to lie well. You'll be prosecuted for theft. I'm already prosecutable if anyone asks right question in right hallway. Sebastian slid one copy into map tube and one into coat lining slit she had sewn during brine crossing. Then we make sure the relevant law exists before they ask. Tamsin gave a brittle grin. I knew there was a reason I backed a fugitive mapmaker over 6 titled men. Days compressed into hearings, depositions, and nights with too little sleep. Tribunal benches filled with faces hungry for spectacle and deniability in equal measure. Ilex insisted procedures be followed while challenging each procedure until it clogged. He objected to page numbering, witness order, wax chain, language tense, and whether copied pages counted as evidence when originals were no longer where his office expected them to be. On second hearing day, he called for inspection of identities of all petitioners and witnesses. Sebastian felt cold slide down spine before clerk even approached with compliance tray. Left arm, clerk said, and she knew. She pushed sleeve up. Forged transit brand looked almost official at glance. Nested loops, district notch, scar shading. Clerk peered, touched edge with blunt probe, frowned. This was not heat-pressed, he said loudly enough first rows heard. Pigment only, fraud mark. Murmurs rose, hungry. A woman on lower bench leaned toward neighbor with eyes bright as if this were better than theater. Ilex did not smile, but eyes sharpened. Petitioner stands before tribunal under falsified transit credential. Sebastian forced voice through dry throat. Because valid credentials issue only after designation, I crossed 3 territories refusing assignment. You made lawful movement impossible. Answer accusation. I forged to survive gates your office weaponized. A marshal stepped forward, hand on baton. Harrow, tied at rail by rule, went rigid and let out a warning rumble that made the marshal glance down and reconsider distance. Cale stood. Motion to defer sanction until charter hearing. Identity fraud under coercive system is materially linked to petition claim. Ilex snapped. Regent Eyre does not chair this bench. Cale's reply stayed flat. No, but code permits temporary suspension where immediate punishment prejudices repeal proceedings. He turned to clerk's law board and pointed. Title 4, Emergency Stay, 30 days by Regent signature. He took chalk, wrote citation line by line, and read aloud so every bench heard each word distinctly. Regent authority may suspend execution of designation-linked penalties for 30 days pending chamber review when credible claim of systemic coercion is entered. He signed suspension in front of everyone, then handed chalk back without flourish. Ilex's nostrils flared. You spend authority cheaply. I spend it where process can still function. The forged brand remained exposed to every eye, shame prickling Sebastian's skin hotter than fever, but sanction did not fall that day. She pulled sleeve down with fingers that only shook after she sat. Hearing adjourned near dusk. Rain hammered slate roofs and gutter mouths coughed brown water into courtyards. The whole complex smelled of wet rope, cold ash, and old paper waking damp. Night before vote, Sebastian sat on floor with back against cot frame, knees up, copied ledger pages spread around her in a fan. Harrow lay across door, chin on paws, body angled so anyone entering would have to step over him and decide whether they wanted to risk speed versus teeth. Each time corridor steps approached, his ears lifted and lowered. Once he stood, listened, then lay back down when footsteps passed by. Ink smell mixed with wet wool and metallic tang from her own skin, where anxiety cooled sweat under sleeves. She read until lines blurred, names becoming tally marks, sums becoming pulse beats. She had mapped rivers with less care than she now traced notations in margins. A knock. 2 beats. Pause. 1 beat. Kale's pattern from tribunal days. She did not answer at once. Harrow rose, hackles lifting along spine. At her touch on collar he stayed but did not relax entirely. When she unlatched, Kale entered ducking low lintel. He looked larger inside her room and less armored. Rain had darkened shoulders of his coat. No guards, no papers, no ceremonial excuse in his hands. Tomorrow he'll argue evidence is contaminated by theft, he said. He'll argue Sky is fabricated if it buys him a week. Kale glanced at ledgers, then at her hand braced on floor. You should sleep. Say that again and I'll bite you. A breath that might have been a laugh left him before expression shifted. Not softer exactly, but less braced against impact. I came to say something that cannot wait for procedure. She stilled. He stepped around one spread page and stopped close enough she could smell rain and corridor brazier smoke on him. I do not want your obedience. Words landed heavier than his formal declarations ever had. I want you, he said, quieter. Not because code would let me take, because when you looked at me in that hall and did not look away, for one beat I remembered there is a person behind every file I signed and every silence I kept. Sebastian's pulse thudded in her teeth hard enough to blur edges of room. Iron, ink, rain, and cedar soap thickened air. Her body leaned before thought approved. She was aware of everything at once, the rough seam at his cuff brushing her wrist, heat in her neck, Harrow shifting weight at door, water ticking from eaves outside. She hated that she noticed his mouth in a week like this. She hated less that she noticed. You say this now, she said, voice rough, because tomorrow you might lose authority. I say it because tomorrow you may win freedom and decide never to look at me again. He reached slowly, hand open. She mirrored without decision. Fingers met, callus to callus, a jolt-up arm sharp as static, and then lingering warmth. He moved closer. She did too until only breath separated them. His forehead touched hers first, tentative, as if confirming she was still there, and willing. Then his mouth brushed corner of hers and found full contact. Not ritual, not claim. No witness, no rod strike, no clerk to record. Kiss deepened with restrained hunger, both of them visibly holding boundaries even while crossing one. Harrow made low sound at door, not warning exactly, more question and reminder. They broke apart with chests rising hard. Sebastian pressed fists to sternum as if ribs might split. If we cross the rest tonight, she said, they'll call it leverage. They'll say charter came from your bed and my desperation. They'll say that anyway. Yes, but I need one part of this not dictated by timing and panic. Kale nodded, eyes dark, jaw tight enough muscles stood out along cheek. Chosen timing. Chosen timing, she echoed. He stepped back. Every inch looked like effort. At door he paused, hand on latch, Harrow watching him steadily from floorboards. Tomorrow when he names your brand fraud, Kale said, I'll stand where all can see. Not in front of you, beside you. He left. Harrow reclaimed his place across threshold, heavier now, as if he had accepted a duty no one had spoken aloud. She slept in fragments and dreams of corridors that looped. At one point she woke to Harrow's head resting on her ankle through blanket edge, his breath warm and regular. She pressed hand into his fur and counted 10 breaths until her own steadied. Some nights do not resolve anything, but they change the terms of what you can no longer pretend not to know. Morning came with clear air scrubbed by rain. Hall of Seals filled early. By first bell, benches were standing room, and side aisles crowded with lesser clerks pretending they were there to deliver forms. Excerpted ledger pages had spread overnight, copied by candlelight and passed hand to hand under breakfast trays and cloak folds. Ilex arrived last and made everyone wait before sitting, an old performance he had used for years to remind room where time supposedly came from. Procedure opened with witness recall. Tamsin took stand in clerk blue, hair pinned too tight. Hands shook when still. When handling papers, they steadied. "You removed records from restricted archive," Ilex said. "Yes." State motive: to prevent destruction and expose unlawful auctions carried under designation authority. "You confess theft." "I confess what I did. I do not concede your definition of what duty required." Murmur. Ilex's eyes narrowed. "Did you receive payment?" "No." "Promise of rank?" "No." "Direction from petitioner?" Tamsin looked at Sebastian, then back to bench. "I acted before she knew. Convenient. Documented." Ilex leaned forward. "You understand penalty for archive theft includes labor seizure." Tamsin's voice thinned, then firmed. "I understood before I carried the books." Gasps from upper benches when she said it that plainly. A few delegates knocked knuckles against wood in involuntary approval before catching themselves and folding hands again. Ilex turned to Sebastian. "Mapmaker, verify if you can. Are these ledgers genuine?" She walked to evidence table, broke wax on first wrapped book, and lifted it for all to see. Book sequence matches archive notation. Wax blend at transfer marks corresponds to territory formulas. Ash mica ratio visible in low light. Brine eel oil cut present. Veil gold dust suspended in clear beeswax. She turned pages so benches could see dated entries. Transit timing aligns with closure weeks and passable tracks. I mapped those tracks firsthand while fugitive. Entries match when road movement was possible and impossible. You admit fugitive status proudly. I describe it accurately. Kale requested reading of Sanction Precedence Code. Clerk read with trembling voice but clear diction. Emergency stay language, 30-day limit, and requirement that public repeal requires chamber vote. The room heard every legal rung they were climbing, one citation at a time. Ilex shifted tactic, attacked Kale. "Regent Heir, how many claims have you ratified before this performance?" Kale did not look away. "Enough to stain me." "Give number." "I won't reduce people to arithmetic for your convenience." "Then admit complicity." "I was complicit," Kale said. "I used silence as discipline and called it governance. I let harms continue because stopping them cost influence I wanted preserved. I am not asking absolution. I am asking this chamber to constrain me and this office so this cannot continue." No applause followed. Truth settled in room like a weight no one could shrug. Tribunal recessed. Delegates sent to caucus before final conclave vote. Sebastian found Kale beneath colonnade where stone held morning chill. He leaned on balustrade, eyes on city roofs as if reading routes on unfamiliar map. "You didn't defend yourself," she said. "There was no defense that wasn't excuse. There was context. Context matters for design. It does not erase impact." She stepped beside him, elbows on stone. Courtyard below seethed with runners, pages, gossiping aides. Harrow sat at her heel, scanning each approach, and then relaxing when it was only passing clerks. "I said trust," she told him. not absolution. He looked at her, and something in his face shifted. Not healed, not absolved, but less braced to be struck from every direction at once. After vote, he said, whatever result, we go in daylight. No corridors, no shadows pretending to be privacy. In daylight, she said. Harrow nudged her hand with his nose until she scratched behind his scarred ear. He leaned into it hard, then resumed watch. Inside, final conclave reconvened in same hall, same dais, same witness benches that had watched attempted coercion days before. Architecture had not changed. Positions had. Ilex opened with procedural precision sharpened to brittleness. Chamber reminded. Repeal motion requires counted division. Until count entered, existing designation code remains enforceable in full. Sebastian climbed dais steps with charter parchment in both hands. Harrow padded beside and sat when she stopped, flank touching her right boot. Several guards glanced at him and then at Kale. Kale gave one minimal shake of head. Leave it. Ilex's gaze cut toward the dog. Animals are not recognized in chamber order. Kale answered before Sebastian could. He is quieter than half this room. A ripple of laughter moved and died quickly. Sebastian began reading 9 clauses. She slowed on each heading, then read body text clear enough for outer benches. Clause 1. Status is self-declared. No authority may assign identity category against stated will. Clause 2. Labor contracts require explicit consent, fixed term, and compensation schedule logged in open registry. Clause 3. Lineage, debt, marriage, and decree are prohibited grounds for designation or claim. Clause 4. Transit rights cannot be conditioned on designation status. Gate access procedures standardized across territories. Clause 5. Archive transparency requirements, audit intervals, and duplicate access for civic observers. Clause 6. Immunity for retrieval, copying, or disclosure of records where systemic coercion is credibly evidenced and verified by tribunal review. At Clause 6, Tamsin lowered head and closed eyes for one breath as immunity language crossed chamber. Her prosecuted attempt, already filed by loyalists, would fail if charter held. Not favor. Procedure. Clause 7. Evidentiary standards for tribunal petitions under coercive systems. Burden shifting where state records are shown compromised. Clause 8. Regent emergency suspension power capped at 30 days. Automatic review at day 25. No unilateral renewal without chamber notice. Kale spoke the 30-day limit aloud when prompted, giving the room a boundary in his own voice. Clause 9. Nullification of compulsory marks and survival forgeries linked to coercive designation conditions. Non-punitive status restoration. As she read final line, Sebastian felt the old false brand on her forearm itch under sleeve, as if memory itself objected to being reclassified. Ilex slammed seal rod against stone. You ask for administrative collapse. She met his stare. I ask for consent and accountable process. He called for division vote. Delegates stood by side, repeal and retain. Rustle of movement swept chamber like rain over dry leaves. Some stood immediately, some after looking at neighbors, some after long stillness that looked like prayer. Tally clerks counted once, then again. Brass pins flipped. 41, 17. For suspended beat, nobody trusted board enough to react. Then sound struck from everywhere, benches thudding, boots stamping, weeping muffled in sleeves, arguments already restarting over implementation timetable. Harrow barked once, sharp and surprised by his own voice, then sat again and leaned against Sebastian's shin. Ilex remained upright through noise, face gone oddly blank. Challenge, he said. I challenge count validity. Denied, came 3 voices from separate benches before he finished phrasing. Kale stepped forward with tribunal writ already signed. Chancellor Elex Varn is removed pending exile terms under abuse findings and chamber mandate. Guards approached Ilex, careful not to touch until he moved. He moved. One clipped step at a time down dais stairs he had climbed for years. At threshold he turned back, eyes on no one and everyone. You will discover what follows when rules are loosened. Sebastian answered without raising voice. Then we will build rules that do not require forced bonds. He left between guards, cloak hem skimming stone. The hall did not become calm. Repeal opened space. It did not install harmony. Delegates shouted proposed amendments and implementation fears. Clerks chased revised language. Messengers ran copy packets to outer offices and gatehouses. Loyalists muttered about invalid signatures. Petitioners in side aisles cried and laughed in alternating bursts. Inside churn, specific outcomes settled. Tamsin's immunity clause remained an adopted charter text after line-by-line verification. A prosecution attempt filed against her by a Loyalist archive supervisor was heard and dismissed under Clause 6 before dusk. Dismissal language was copied to 3 boards by sunset. She packed satchel that evening with copied forms, blank registries, 1 chipped mug, and twine bundles, preparing to leave for the new free registry office. Sebastian stood for public nullification review. Her forged transit brand was examined under Clause 9, entered as survival mark under coercive conditions, and voided without penalty. Clerk announcing decision spoke loud enough for corridor crowd. Murmur that followed sounded different from first exposure, less appetite, more recalibration, and cautious relief. Kale submitted formal statement of complicity into tribunal record. No rhetorical flourish. He listed orders signed, orders not challenged, and omissions. Chamber censured him from unilateral claim ratification powers pending charter restructuring. He endorsed limitation allowed and signed it with steady hand. By late afternoon, light through high windows turned dust to gold strands over tables piled with corrected drafts. Sebastian stood on dais step where first rupture had begun. Harrow sprawled there now, chin on paws, open mouth pant, unconcerned with constitutional language but alert to tone shifts. Kale approached without entourage. No guard announced him. No one gave ceremony. Sebastian Wildfire, he said, formal enough to honor Hinge of Day. Chamber requests your co-authorship mark on final charter copy. She huffed a tired laugh. I thought we were done with marks. Then call it by plain name, your signature, your terms. He offered pen heavier than archive nibs she preferred, silver cap nicked from long use. She rolled it once between fingers, feeling unfamiliar balance. And after signatures? She asked. After signatures, we walk outside. Into daylight. Into daylight. She signed. Ink darkened and soaked into fiber slowly. She watched her name settle, hand steady for first time in days. They did walk outside, down broad front steps where petitioners had once queued under guard scrutiny. City air smelled of wet stone, yeast bread from stall reopening after crowd surge, horse sweat, hot iron from Smithy Lane. Bells in 3 districts rang unevenly as word traveled. Ash Quarter slow and tolling, Brine Market quick metallic peals, Vale Enclave ringing in clusters as if each tower waited for confirmation from the next. Harrow trotted ahead, then doubled back and pressed against Sebastian's leg, counting his people by contact and glance. He did this each time crowd thickened. Check her, check Kale, scan exits, return. Tamsin came down steps carrying 2 ledger copies tied with twine and stack of fresh registry forms under arm. Loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek. She blew at it and failed to move it. I'm leaving before someone invents committee to trap me in subcommittee comments for 6 months. Sebastian stepped in and hugged her hard enough to crumple papers. Tamsin swore, laughed, and hugged back. Send for route maps, Sebastian said. I'll draw every border path that doesn't require permission from men like him. I will. Tamsin stepped back, eyes bright and exhausted. Try joy once before you drown in implementation. No promises. Liar. Tamsin crouched, scratched Harrow behind split ear. Guard her. Bite strategically. Harrow leaned into her hand and gave one soft huff. She stood and headed down street without looking back, stride quick and purposeful. Twilight-edged roofs purple by time Sebastian and Cale reached old floodwall above river. No guards, no clerks, no audience. Just current hitting stone and distant hawkers packing stalls. Wind-off water carried smell of mud and fish and damp rope. Cale rested forearms on wall. I thought repeal would feel like something cleaner. It feels like being handed tools and ruins simultaneously. Sebastian stood beside him. We have tools now. Ruins we already had. He nodded once. May I touch you? Consent, plain and audible, with no legal witnesses needed. Yes. He placed hand at her waist and waited. When she leaned in, he drew her closer. Their kiss this time was slower, less desperate, no courtroom tension vibrating under skin. She kept eyes open for first moment, taking in his face in riverlight, then closed them. Her body recognized him before her mind arranged arguments. Warmth low in belly, breath hitch, shoulder muscles easing after years of readiness. When they parted, he touched forehead to hers. No claims, he said. No claims, she answered. A bond only if we keep choosing it. Each day. Each day. They stayed at floodwall until stars emerged between cloud rags, talking in practical fragments because both trusted detail over declaration. Transition timelines so laborers were not left unpaid during contract conversion. Gatehouses still holding old forms and which clerks might sabotage replacement. Map postings in public squares for routes independent of designation status. Review mechanism to ensure 30-day suspension cap could not be evaded by clerical delay. At one point he asked, "Will you help train route auditors?" She smiled against his shoulder. "You're asking a fugitive to train your officials. I'm asking the best field mapper in 3 territories." Flattery from a censure order recipient, bold. Desperate, maybe. Harrow lay nearby with chin on paws, watching them and the river alternately. When night carts rattled over bridge above, he stood, scanned, then settled again once noise passed. Later, in her room, Harrow turned 3 circles and dropped beside cot with a grunt that vibrated floorboard. Sebastian sat cross-legged and unrolled old travel map. Edges frayed, rain-stained, one corner patched with thread. She added a new line in dark ink across former boundaries, not border, route. Registry houses linked by roads she had once used to run. She touched faded false brand on forearm. Scar looked same under lamp. Law now named it differently. Survival artifact under coercion, voided as basis for punishment. Skin did not change with statute. Consequences did. Outside, voices drifted from street. One man argued Clause 4 at full volume with someone who clearly had not read past heading. A woman laughed and corrected him. Somewhere a crier mangled legal terms into song. Somewhere a child asked what designation meant and got 3 conflicting answers in rapid succession. Harrow raised head at the noise, decided none of it required intervention, and put head back down on pause. She slept deeper that night than she had in years. At dawn she woke before bells, opened shutters. Mist sat low over cobbles. Cale waited in street below with 2 cups of bitter tea and no formal coat, hair still damp from hurried wash. He looked up when shutter clicked. Harrow spotted him first and thumped tail against floorboards hard enough to rattle map tube against wall. Sebastian laughed, short, surprised sound, and went down barefoot, boots in hand. Outside, stone was cold under her feet until she stepped onto dry patch near door. Cale offered cup. She took it. Steam smelled of burnt leaves and clove. They stood close enough, sleeves brushed. No dais, no seal rod, no audience demanding proof that care could exist without compulsion. Harrow sat against her boot, shoulder pressing lightly, and watched street wake as bakers unbarred windows and cartwheels began their morning rhythm. By second bell, they were back in Hall Annex for implementation session. Joy did not excuse work. Work did not erase joy. In Annex room with cracked plaster and too few chairs, Sebastian spread route maps across table while two junior clerks tried to pretend they already understood contour marks. She pointed with charcoal. These roads flood first. Do not send registry runners here in thaw week. Use ridge track instead, even if longer. Longer and alive beats shorter and missing. Clerk 1 nodded too quickly. Clerk 2 asked, "How do we verify passability without patrol reports?" "Use millers," Sebastian said. "They know wheel depth in mud by axle noise. Pay for information. Don't requisition it." Cale entered midway with stack of amended forms and looked mildly shocked to find Harrow occupying the only empty chair. "He appears to outrank my office." "He got here first," Sebastian said. Cale set forms down, then stayed standing. "Gatehouse 12 rejected new transit directive this morning." "On what basis?" "Old seal requirement." She tapped map. "Then we send copy runner with clause 4 and courier from 2 territories, not 1. Make refusal interterritorial non-compliance, not local discretion." He smiled despite fatigue. "I know why they fear you." "Because I bite?" "Because you map exits from arguments." Harrow yawned hugely, revealing scarred gums and worn canines, then rested chin on table edge where he could monitor all 3 humans and the door simultaneously. By midday, notices had gone to 7 gatehouses. By dusk, 4 complied, 2 delayed, 1 contested. By next morning, contested house complied after receiving chamber-stamped clarification and 2 witnesses from mixed delegations. Process was not pretty. It moved. Tamsin sent first letter from Provisional Free Registry Office 2 days later, courier smudged and smelling faintly of fish market where office borrowed upper room. "We have desks, no locks, 1 ledger rack, and 6 people arguing category names," she wrote. "Progress." She enclosed requisition list and a sketch of room plan with arrow labeled "Window that leaks." Sebastian laughed reading it and handed page to Cale. "She's thriving." "She's terrifying," he said with admiration. "Both can be true." Night settled into new rhythm. Sometimes Sebastian worked late in map room while Cale argued implementation language in adjacent chamber. He would appear at doorway with 2 stale rolls and ask if ridge hatchings were meant to look that aggressive. She would ask if he had eaten anything not copied from legal text. Harrow moved between rooms, choosing whichever human sounded most like they were forgetting to breathe. Once, near midnight, a junior messenger arrived shaking with fear, having been shouted down by a former designation supervisor who refused to surrender records. Sebastian crouched to eye level, handed him water, and asked him to redraw route from memory. When his hand steadied, Harrow put chin briefly on his knee. Messenger stopped shaking enough to finish report. In first public review week, people lined outside temporary registry office before sunrise. Some came with old claim papers they wanted voided. Some came to declare status for first time, in records they could inspect themselves. Some came only to see if rumor was true. The line was noisy, suspicious, hopeful, angry, relieved, all at once. Sebastian and Cale stood outside one morning watching intake. Tamsin stood in doorway directing flow like a harbor master with ink-stained fingers, calling, "Forms here, witnesses there. No, you cannot bribe me with dried pears. Yes, bring your sister inside, she can sign." Cale said quietly, "This is what was hidden from me when I chose not to look." Sebastian answered, "It was not hidden. It was made easy to ignore." He accepted that without defense. Weeks later, formal exile order for Alex Varn was carried out under guard with public record posting. Crowd reaction was mixed. Cheers, silence, a few shouted objections. Sebastian did not attend transfer. She read record after, then folded it and put it away. On day forged brands were collectively reviewed. Dozens came with scars, inks, failed burns, and improvised marks used to pass gates or survive inspections. Tribunal table ran out of category slips by mid-morning. Sebastian volunteered as verifier where root context mattered. She listened to stories she recognized in cadence, if not detail. Running at dawn, trading boots for passage, choosing between hunger and capture. At lunch break, she stepped outside, shaking with contained grief and anger. Cale found her by rain barrel, handed her cloth for ink-streaked hands, said nothing until she spoke. "They keep apologizing to me," she said, as if surviving near me is something to justify. "They're matching old reflexes to new rules," he said. "It will take time." She leaned against him, forehead to shoulder. Harrow pressed against her calves from behind, pinning her gently between two steady weights until breath evened. When first quarter review met in Hall of Seals, the pale square where old sigil had hung was still visible. Sebastian suggested leaving it unfilled for a year as reminder. Chamber agreed after argument, and one failed motion to install neutral emblem immediately. Neutrality, she learned, was often just urgency to forget. At that session, she read implementation report, gate compliance rates, contract conversion backlog, reported coercion incidents down but not gone, training deficiencies in outer districts, recommended map postings increased at ferry points. Her voice no longer shook on dais, though hands still tingled afterward. Cale presented censure compliance report himself. Unilateral claim authority remains suspended per charter, he read. Review board staffed by rotating delegates and civic observers. He did not ask for restoration and did not receive it. After session, as benches emptied, an elderly delegate from Ash who had voted retain approached Sebastian with stiff knees and stiff face. "My son says your clause saved him from reassignment," she said, as if reporting weather. "I still dislike your method." Sebastian nodded. "You're allowed." Delegate sniffed, looked down at Harrow. "Dog has sense." Then she walked off before Sebastian could answer. Evenings, when work finally released them, Sebastian and Cale kept their promise of daylight and open walking when possible. They did not hide in corridors anymore. Sometimes they sat on flood wall, sometimes in crowded market lane where anonymity came from being ordinary, not concealed. They spoke of logistics, then of smaller things, what foods each had missed while traveling, how Cale once wanted to build clockworks before inheriting office pressure, how Sebastian mapped by stars when landmarks failed and taught herself to trust cloud gaps. One evening he asked, "What did you call Harrow before I knew him?" She scratched Harrow's neck. "Still Harrow." Named him after harrow-toothed tracks in spring fields near Ash. He dug up my map stakes as a pup and refused to leave. I failed to return him. He failed to leave me. Best administrative failure in chamber record. Don't put that in minutes. Harrow sneezed as if in agreement. As summer edged in, Free Registry Office moved from borrowed fish market room to former tax annex with proper shutters and a roof that leaked only in one corner instead of 3. Tamsin sent update. "We now own 2 chairs that do not bite." She requested wall maps. Sebastian sent 6 and a note. Label roads by season. When first cohort of registry clerks graduated root and consent training, Sebastian watched them take oath language revised from old claim formula. Harrow lay under podium and snored through half of it. No one objected. By harvest turn, some who had resisted charter began using its protections anyway. A mill owner who denounced repeal filed complaint when competitor tried to force debt designation contract. Chamber accepted complaint under same clauses he had called dangerous. Sebastian was told this as gossip over tea and felt complicated satisfaction. She and Kale did not rush declarations beyond what they had already said. They shared rooms some nights, separate rooms others, both by agreement and work necessity. They asked before touching when tension ran high. They argued over policy and then over whose turn it was to check proofs. Desire did not erase disagreement. Agreement did not require performance. On one rain-heavy evening, after a brutal session about compensation arrears, Sebastian came back raw and ready to snap at anyone breathing near her. Harrow met her at door with muddy paws and unapologetic eyes. Kale looked up from table and said only, "Tea's hot. Sit or pace, your choice." She paced. Harrow paced with her for 2 lengths, then flopped directly in path until she tripped, cursed, and finally laughed enough to stop shaking. By winter, Hall of Seals had new tally board maintenance schedule because old hinges stuck in damp, and no one wanted another disputed count over hardware failure. Sebastian insisted on it in committee. "If we trust numbers, we maintain tools," she said. Motion passed. On anniversary of vote, chamber reconvened in full witness session. Same benches, same dais, same board. Sebastian stood where she had first been called, unclassified. Harrow sat beside her boot exactly as he had on vote day, scar-catching lamplight. Kale stood to left, no claim rights to exercise, no rod to strike, only report to present. Sebastian read Annual Charter Impact Summary. She included failures plainly, regions undercomplying, backlog harms, intimidation attempts. She included gains with equal precision, reduced forced assignments, increased voluntary contracts, transit denials sharply down, dismissed prosecutions under immunity clause, upheld on appeal. When she finished, room applauded, not unanimous, not theatrical, but sustained and grounded. After session, she signed updated charter annotations as co-author. Her name beside clauses no longer looked improbable. Kale signed adjacent as regent witness under censure terms. Tamsin signed as registry director from newly established office, then joked that her signature had improved only because she finally owned decent ink. Outside, snow began as fine powder and then thickened. Harrow bounded once, surprised by first flakes on nose, then composed himself and resumed steady pace between them down steps. Sebastian looked up at gray-white sky, breath clouding. "You know what I used to think when I crossed borders?" Kale glanced over. "What?" "That every line on a map was a warning." "And now?" "Now some of them are routes." He nodded, and they kept walking, Harrow's paws crunching in fresh snow beside them, all three visible in daylight,